Hello, everyone. I'm Father Alex Sandahar,
And I'm Dave Marshall.
and this is A Bridge Between, a podcast for two priests who live a bridge apart, trying to be dads and priests at the same time.
And trying to build a bridge between you and the gospel lesson.
All right. So today's the day. We're finally talking about Christmas Eve, Christmas Day.
Yay, it has
Um,
come.
if it hasn't been bought and wrapped and put together, then you better be headed over to Walgreens at the last minute and see if you can go down that toy aisle or buy somebody some cookies and candy, because the 0 hour is upon us. And Dave, one of the things I was thinking about is um, what are we preaching on Christmas? Advent is this wonderful season. It lasts exactly 4 weeks. And during that time, we talk a lot about anticipation.
Yep.
We talk a lot about getting ready, and the various readings put us into that mindset. And then it's here. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I just find myself saying, Christmas comes once a year, and I don't want to keep saying the same thing. But at the
Right.
same time, I don't know what else there is to say about Christmas other than Jesus is here.
Right. Right. Well, I think you and I, over the next 20 minutes, will be talking more about what that means to have Jesus is here, and we'll get into that. But you brought up preaching because it is, I think for me, it's the hardest sermon to give all year. And some of it is I put a particular constraint on myself. Can I share a story about Father Jack? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So you've been there, I've been there. We've all been mentored by people. And Father Jack Dempsey from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is North Idaho, retired Navy captain, Navy chaplain as well. And he is at least 380 pounds. I mean, he's passed away since. Maybe 400 pounds. He is morbidly obese. He has a gigantic ZZ Top beard that's black and kind of craggly. And after years of being on Navy ships, his hearing isn't so good, and his voice is deep and gravelly until he sings. And then he sounds like a deep cello. I mean, it's just gorgeous. But his normal talking voice sounds a little like this. This is how Jack talks. And so that's Jack. And he has taught me a lot about ministry. So for a whole variety of reasons, the rector of the parish where I was serving as a curate was unable to preach on Christmas Eve. I can tell it's a whole separate story.
Yeah.
And so it fell onto me. I'm a deacon. I have not been ordained as a priest yet. It is Christmas Eve. The church has a tremendous amount of tension because of all the things going on. And then people are just streaming in to this beautiful historic church in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So there's a side door, and I was looking in the side door, watching people come in, watching the ushers get chairs and try to put people in all sorts of places because just more and more people are coming in. And Jack wheeled himself over to me and said, and kind of leaned in and looked, and he said, that's a lot of people there. I said, yeah, thanks. And he said, well, they're not here to hear you preach.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And so then the other associate kind of hit Jack on the shoulder. That's not a nice thing to say. And he said, it's true. They're not here to hear him preach. They're here to get communion, to sing Silent Night, and to go home. That's what they want. And the faster you get them from communion to Silent Night to home, the better. So that is the theology of, or the ecclesiology of Father Jack. So what I have done for every Christmas Eve service is think of Jack, and then limit my sermons, and this is really, really hard for me, to 3 to 5 minutes. Super short. And the hardest sermon to preach is the short one.
Yeah.
So to condense everything down and to try to encapsulate it all. And so I have not been hitting 5 minutes, I've been hitting 7, but if I can get it down, if I'm shooting for 5, then that's what it is. And so I have my own constraints put onto it about make it a simple message, make it clear, joyful, and then head to the prayers, because remember, they're not here to hear you preach. So,
on one level, it's like, you take the grizzled old veteran who's got the wisdom, and you say to yourself, there is something to that.
Right.
In that, I think in my experience going to church, I can't remember a single Christmas Eve sermon that like I ever from a church I ever attended, all the way from when I was a little kid, growing up. But what I do remember is the environment in which the sermon was given, the beauty of the church, the decorations, and so one of the things I think I did either last year or the year before is we got to the end of Advent and in Christmas Eve, and I said, at the end of this service is when we'll say that Christmas has come, right? Because we're keeping vigil. But for right now, the manger is empty.
Right.
And I kind of talk a little bit about this idea of what if the manger had never been filled?
Wow.
And where would we be? Where would our world be if Christ had not come? It's kind of reflective a little bit, from a systematic theology standpoint of the whole what if the cross was empty kind of thing.
Right.
But that's several months from now. Yeah. But just from the perspective of, what if Christ had not come? Well, the good thing is we don't have to imagine what if.
Well, yeah, but let's not jump there yet, right? Yeah. Let's look at that. So the birth of Jesus and his life has changed the calendar, right? So if he was never born, we would have a different calendar.
Yep.
Right. We would still be in BCE or whatever you want to call it. Number two is music, right? So much music has been written not only about his birth, but about his life. We wouldn't have that. Art. I mean, I have this lovely card that somebody sent me of the Holy Family. Where would we be without that? And this is beyond eschatology. This is beyond salvific theology and all the rest of that. As in, how would we be saved? Just how radically different our world would be.
Right.
That's interesting.
So I kind of like to have people, reflect on that a little bit and to push them to ask, does it matter in my life that Christ has been born? Because I think we need to have these liminal moments, these kind of life-giving moments where we get to ask questions like that at this time of year. And it's also conscious of the fact that for many people, it's a terrible time of year. We've talked about this before. Right. It's a terrible time of year. Not only is there a lot of present suffering, but for many people, there's a lot of past suffering that they've experienced. A lot of death or broken relationships, all these kinds of things. And I think part of us relaying the gospel to people is to say, yes, it does matter that this child has been born because it has transformed everything. It's transformed our relationship to God. It should transform our relationship to one another. And it can even transform your relationship to your grief. And I think that's a key part that I try to get through with people.
Right. So I wrote that down, by the way. So thank you for writing my sermon.
Oh, you're welcome. Just make sure you include the footnote. And it was funny. I feel kind of I'm trying to think of the word where you're kind of not very sanctified or something like that, where you're thinking about all the art that wouldn't be made, all the music that wouldn't be made. And all I could think of is, are you saying we wouldn't have Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You"?
We wouldn't.
we wouldn't have it.
No. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Wait, what's Christmas, right? That wouldn't be there. So yeah, that's very true. So the footnote is to mention that you said that. Is that the footnote? Is that what I'm hearing?
Something like that.
All right. Well, I'm going to use a line that Steve Martin used. And he said, Steve Martin, when it comes to other comedians' jokes, he has a steel trap mind. He steals whatever comes out of their trap and hope they don't mind. So
never mind. There you go.
That's what I'm doing. No, I'll give you credit, of course.
I know, it's okay.
Maybe.
So, so looking ahead at the actual readings that we have, we obviously know that on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we tell the story of Jesus's birth, unless we use the readings designated for Christmas 3, which would be, telling from the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word. So those are the options. But usually on Christmas Eve, I always like to have the narrative from Luke, in this case, because it's year A, that we're going to talk about the birth of Jesus. And you and I kind of condensed it down because people are going to hear it anyway. We've condensed it down to just a couple of verses that we think are pivotal. You want to share those with us?
I would love to, yes. Being at that my church is all angels. Anytime an angel is mentioned, it gets special credit. So,
There you go.
an angel said to them, the them are the shepherds who were terrified.
Yeah.
So just setting the scene, that terrified shepherds, an angel appears. And the first thing the angel says is, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, for see, I'm bringing you good news of a great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God.
I view that text in a little bit of a different context than many people. First of all, I always love when an angel shows up and says, "Don't be afraid."
Right.
Because anytime you see an angel, your first inclination is fear.
Yes.
Because if you saw an angel, something that you may not imagine happening is about to happen.
Yeah.
But I always think of this passage as a declaration of peace. And what I mean by that is I think humanity just fights against God so much. Fights against God, fights against itself. And God comes and sends an angel and says, peace. It's time for peace. There are people in my congregation who remember where they were when the Second World War ended, as kids or as veterans or things like that. Wow. And when the news came that this horrific war that claimed millions of lives, friends, family that they knew, was over, it wasn't just a sigh of relief. It was the sense that there's peace. Peace can exist. And so I think of it when I hear this passage being spoken to me, Alex, stop fighting God. Stop fighting against God. Stop fighting against others. Just accept the peace that God is offering to the world.
Amen. Can I bring up something else with this too?
Oh, yeah.
So you and I are both dads. You and I have both been present when our children were born, and we know the transforming power that is. And so going back to imagining if the manger remained empty, like if Jesus was never born, how would you describe the relationship that God had with the people before Jesus was born?
Yeah.
What would you say that relationship is?
Well, I think one of the things you and I talked about is from the beginning of God making relationships and covenants with his people, he gave rules, he gave the 10 Commandments, things of that nature to try to create a society, to try to create a people and form them. And now we're seeing something different in the coming of Jesus.
Right. That whatever your life was, whatever my life was before before the adoption of children and then the birth of our children, that is dead and gone, that there is no going back to that, and that there's a new relationship, and that relationship is that there's something greater than me and something that demands a lot more attention than myself. And and that child, that life becomes about this child, and children do a magnificent job of taking over. The other aspect of this, besides the taking things over, is the incredible vulnerability that children have, and it's hard for me to conceptualize the idea that God has been born as a child. And as Luke went to painstakingly detail to this, you will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger. It's not that you will find this child in the palace in Rome,
Hmm.
surrounded by guards day and night, in a hermetically sealed, in some sort of
Yeah.
safe place, right? You'll see him bands of cloth and lying in a manger, and that's
Yeah.
vulnerability, right?
And I think something that's key to that, if I want to connect this thread of God's vulnerability and becoming a dad,
Mhm.
it comes back to one of the things we talked about before, which is if we were to plan all this, we wouldn't do it this way.
No, 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 no.
I will never forget the drive home from the hospital with the first child in the
Mhm.
car seat, and trying to imagine, how do I put rubber bumpers all around the car, or
Right.
how do I purchase a tank,
Yeah.
an A1
Yeah.
Abrams tank,
Right.
and go only exactly 30 miles an hour. And I don't care if I'm being flipped off by anybody in the other lanes. I'm going the speed limit because I've got precious cargo here.
Mhm.
And just reconciling that with, for lack of a better way of saying it, just the reckless amount of love that God has.
Right. Right.
And to say that God will put God's self in a position to have need.
Yes.
And Jesus will do that his entire life. He will need other people.
Hmm.
And so this idea that God needs us is just jarring, in the same way
Right.
that my child needs me. God needed parents.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ethan, who is now 20, just turned 20, that which is hard for me to say. I must have been 8 years old when he was born. Anyway, so um, Ethan, imagine this: Spokane, Washington. It's Eastern Washington, and he was born in a hospital that's up on a ridge. It's near the cathedral, actually, the
Mhm.
Episcopal Cathedral. And December, it's snowing. Everything's icy, and again, up on a hill, up on a ridge, and we have to drive down that through the valley and then back up another ridge. And so it is treacherous just carrying the child in the car seat just to get through the ice and snow to get to the car. I had chains on, because
Yeah.
even though it's loud and horrible, I wasn't going to slip and slide. No way. And then you were driving the speed limit. I was way below the speed limit. And the whole time thinking, as just white gripping it on the wheel, um, I can't believe God has trusted me with this. I can't
Right.
believe God has done this, and that God has done this during winter in a kind of treacherous and scary place, winter wise. And the whole time, God reflecting back, yes, I do trust you with this. Yes, you can do this. Do not be afraid.
Yeah.
See, I'm sending you. Do not be afraid. I am sending you. That this constant repeating phrase, and that's the type of trust and vulnerability that God puts in us with our own faith. That this isn't rule governed, and this isn't God sitting around with a giant mallet that will smash us every time we go off course. No, this is God giving us something precious and trusting us to roll through.
And I think that's even a greater intensity. And that's why I hope that the liturgy that we do
Mhm.
reflects that. So one of the things that I got into the habit of doing, and I love to do it every year that I've been here, is we do a blessing of the creche.
Oh, nice.
And so now the funny thing is that we put a kind of doll ceramic style baby Jesus in the creche,
Okay.
and I actually process with it. So
Nice.
I hold it before the
Hmm.
service starts, and people will walk by and they'll kind of be curious and go, do you, do you have a little baby in your arms? And I go,
Mm.
Shh, you know, and you know,
Don't wake Jesus.
don't wake Jesus. But it's just that, but to me, it's a very spiritual moment because
Mhm.
it is acknowledging just something so precious. And then when we bless the creche and we
Mhm.
talk about God coming into the world in the most unimaginable way,
Right.
it just centers everything on this moment. And actually, you know, I just remember now that I remembered exactly one Christmas sermon that I've ever heard, and
Okay.
it was in seminary. So in Sewanee, when you're on top of the mountain, some people go home for Christmas and some people you just can't, you know.
Right.
And there was one year where we decided, you know what, it's going to snow up here. Well, let's have the snowy Christmas for once, you know, to have it.
Wow.
And then the next year we said no, but we did it that year.
Right.
And so we went to the Chapel of the Apostles, which is the seminary chapel, and the academic dean, who's now the full dean, Dean Jim Terrell at Sewanee, gave the sermon. And he says, you know, I try to give kind of the same one each time, and it's Jesus, the God who is real among us, the God who needs his diaper changed, the God who cries. And it just always sticks with me
Mhm.
that how would we live if we just accepted the fullness and the gravity of that reality of Christ being real in that way?
Mhm. Wow. It reminded me of the only sermon I remember, also from seminary, but
Mhm.
we'll talk about it a different day.
Mhm.
So the other thing to talk about a different day is I made a note to I don't know I'll share when we're not recording
Mhm.
about when I first time I saw my angel, the one who is right around me right now,
Mhm.
and yeah, I had a tremendous amount of fear, not because I saw her. And I don't think angels have genders, but she's
Mhm.
beautiful. So I'm just calling her a she.
Yeah.
Um, where was I? Oh yeah. So I had a tremendous amount of fear. And when she showed up, it stopped the fear. And so anyway, I'll be sure to tell you about that sometime coming up.
Yeah. So as we kind of look ahead towards the Christmas celebration, which we need to remind everybody does not end on the 25th, it
What?
begins.
You
No,
don't take the tree down on the 25th?
well, remember in my house we don't take the tree down ever. So, you know, but you know,
That's
it's the
right.
12 days of Christmas for a
It's a
reason.
perpetual season.
It's the perpetual season,
Always.
you know.
It just
Um,
goes and goes. Yes.
so just to remember that Christmas is goes for 12 days. That's where we get the 12 days of Christmas from. And
Mhm.
so we'll have an episode for Christmas, and then we'll have an episode really that takes place in the new year
Right.
for January 1st for that Sunday
Mhm.
that talks about that Christmas is still going, a new year has begun, and then after that, of course, will be the feast of the Epiphany,
Right.
which is, I think, a lot of theological education has to take place around that,
Mhm.
because the word epiphany, people usually think, I've got an idea, you know,
Right.
and
Well,
it's so much more complicated or so much more intricate than that
right.
with that. And it's just going to be interesting because Christmas leads to the season of Epiphany and the revealing of Jesus Christ throughout the world in these various circumstances where we're acknowledging that he is God and he is a human being at the same time.
Yep. Yep. Good. Epiphany is also the name of my boat, which you have been on and will be on very shortly, soon. So
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Although we put Finn Fin in the middle, but because
Because
we're
it's
silly
Florida.
that way.
Because it's
Right.
Florida. So one of the things I'd like to kind of end with is to say that um, for those people who are listening, make sure that you go to your Christmas liturgy, either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, but take the time to be that liturgy for somebody,
Mm.
to be that celebration of Christmas for another person who can't make it, who can't be there, or who chooses not to, but you know they need that love. pick up that phone and call somebody you haven't talked to in a while. This is the perfect time of year for that.
Mhm.
You know, I have found so many people become reconciled family members during this season, as much as it can be divisive. And that's just kind of, you know, my little after school special moment.
And it requires vulnerability and trust, the same way that God does that with our own faith and with the birth of a child.
Exactly. So
So,
if we're
right.
going to be disciples, let's model the
Mhm.
vulnerability and trust that God shows in sending Jesus, Jesus shows in being in that way, and let's go ahead and do it for other people.
Yep.
All right.
What a present that would be to give.
I see what you did there. I see what you
Yeah,
did. It's
thank you.
Christmas and it's presents, and there you go. All right.
That's right. Nice.
Well, thanks
Alex,
everybody.
this has been fantastic. Thank you for giving me a sermon, and I need it. So, but thank
We
you.
all need one in the back pocket. So
We do.
so thanks everyone for catching up with this episode of A Bridge Between. So this one is going to be for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then the next one that you'll watch after this will be for a whole new year, 2023, if you can believe it.
I can. Amen.
All right. I'll see you later.
Thank you, Alex. Bye.